Yesterday in the Daily Telegraph, Sunday Daily Telegraph, there was an article about football fans that have been allegedly banned by the Football Association, FFA. And the point was made by the journalist Rebecca Wilson that this was a name and shame exercise, and that the preponderance of the fans banned were from the Western Sydney Wanderers fan group. There's a couple of problems with that. First of all, some of the people so supposedly named and shamed weren't banned at all. And second, some of them were under 18. And of course, naming those under 18 is, well, in some circumstances illegal, and it's certainly improper. But the question also is, where did that information come from? Rebecca Wilson is not known as an investigative journalist of repute. So the information must have come from either the FFA, which has a strong privacy policy, or the New South Wales Police. Now, if it came from the New South Wales Police, that's a pretty serious problem. The New South Wales Police has been in a state of conflict, if you like, with Western Sydney Wanderers fans for a while. The New South Wales Police Association labelled them grubs in a press release just a couple of weeks ago. Now, if they released information on the supposedly banned fans, then that would be a very serious breach of not only privacy but also police ethics. It's a serious problem. The Daily Telegraph has some making up to do, otherwise I suspect it may have a liability problem. Football Federation has potentially a serious privacy breach, or the New South Wales Police have a serious ethical, at the very least ethical if not legal question to face. Anything else you want to talk about?
This morning there was an article by Kevin Andrews calling for Australian boots on the ground in Syria. What's your take on this?
Yeah, boots on the ground in Syria, there's really no justification for that until there is a proper strategy for what will be the outcome and how will it be managed. We have had boots on the ground before in Iraq. The Americans had boots on the ground, and we've had them too in Afghanistan. The outcome in both cases was unsatisfactory, and unless there is a plan that will make this different, then I wouldn't support boots on the ground.
News calls out today saying 3 out of 4 Australians fear a terror attack is likely in Australia. What are your thoughts on that?
The kind of large-scale terror attack that we saw in Paris is probably not very likely. They would have to assemble substantial supplies of guns and explosives and so forth in order to carry that out. But individual terror attacks, such as we saw in Lint Cafe, and the murder of Curtis Cheng, I think there's a very distinct possibility of that sort of thing occurring again. I don't have any fears of a Paris-style attack, though.
And Simon Education Minister Simon Birmingham has flagged the idea of changing childcare to pay by the hour. What's your take on that?
Childcare is over-regulated, seriously over-regulated, and this is a step in the right direction. Deregulation of childcare is long overdue. One of the reasons it's so expensive and it ends up costing the taxpayers money so much in subsidies is because it is excessively regulated. This is only a small step in the right direction, but if it indicates a trend towards substantial deregulation of the childcare sector so that the costs are lowered, then I think it's to be welcomed. I would like to think that this idea of requiring a certain number of teachers to have degrees and some of the conditions that they place on childcare centres, which have really very little relevance to taking good care of the children, I think they should be scrutinised, in many cases abolished. That would lower the cost as well. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to convince the government to go down that path at this stage.
They're planning on having it up and running by 2017, which means they're going to have to get it into the House soon. Have they approached you about how you're going to vote?
About what?
About how you'd vote
on
childcare legislation.
The childcare legislation? No. No, the only childcare or information legislation that I've been briefed on is actually the Child childcare payments changes. That's contingent on changes to the family tax benefit eligibility, which seems to be the sticking point with some of my crossbench colleagues. So I'm not sure where that childcare increase in childcare funding proposal will, I don't know where it will end up because they can't fund it. It's $3.5 billion and it's contingent on $4.5 billion in family tax benefit savings, which if they can't achieve, there will be no increase in childcare funding. There is another issue that I was thinking I might have a talk about. In Sydney this week there will be 7 cruise ships arriving, and which will highlight a significant problem. Unless the cruise ships can fit under the harbour bridge, and only the small ones can do that, there is a significant lack of berths for them. What we end up with is a few ships, one or two being able to find a berth, so at Overseas Passenger Terminal. The Navy allows 1 or 2 into Garden Island, and that's it. The rest of them have to berth in the middle of the harbour or scattered around the place that are inappropriate places. Sydney misses out and Australia misses out on substantial tourist revenue when they don't have decent berthing for passenger ships. They spend hundreds of dollars a day when they come ashore, those passengers, but if they don't come ashore, they don't spend that money. And the reason they don't come ashore in many cases is because they have to get into a boat in order to bring them to shore, because there's nowhere for the ships to berth on the shore, and they can only bring them ashore on a boat. So as a result, a lot of passengers stay on board. They tend to be elderly passengers. They still spend plenty of money, and Australia is missing out. We need to do something about it. And one of the things that we could do is to increase the number of ships that can use the Navy facilities at Garden Island. There's quite a number of berths there, and it could easily be opened up for passenger ships. In fact, there was a proposal a few years ago for the Navy to relocate from Sydney Harbour to Port Kembla. I'm arguing that that proposal should be revisited. The fact is the Navy would be more secure at Port Kembla. They're not secure in Sydney Harbour. It's possible to get very close to those Navy ships, and the tourism industry would benefit enormously having the berths at Garden Island available for passenger ships. Our tourism industry is going to be strangled if we don't do something about this. I'd like to see our state and federal politicians put their heads together and come up with a solution. There's billions of dollars at stake in tourism if we don't find looking for a solution. Thanks.
We Greens were thrilled to yesterday announce the details of how we could power Australia's economy with 90% clean energy by 2030. And we've announced a new body, Renew Australia, that would be government-backed to really invest in the pipeline of clean energy projects over those 15 years to help generate the jobs of the future and the prosperity of the future, as we can see that the rest of the world is already turning away from our coal, and that the coal price is now in structural decline, and the profitability of that sector is no more to be powering our economy into the future. So it's disappointing this morning to see the Prime Minister trying to heavy the Chinese to import more Australian coal, when in fact what's clearly needed is the export of our renewable energy and our renewable energy technologies. And it's a great disappointment that just a week out from the Paris climate talks that the Prime Minister is spruiking our coal. Clearly, coal price now is in structural decline, and the jobs of the future are in clean renewable energy. I'm extremely disappointed that the Prime Minister is clinging to Tony Abbott's climate policy and taking our woeful targets to the Paris climate talks when he had an opportunity to actually listen to the scientists instead of sacking them and increase our ambition and actually generate some prosperity and some jobs. We're going to need some transition support for the coal communities who have been sacked at a rapid rate in the last few years, and where I'm from in Queensland, that's a real problem. But instead we have governments with their head in the sand about the transition that's already on, and that could lead to more suffering for workers. We Greens don't want to see that, and we need a plan now to make that transition. We've announced one yesterday, and we invite the Prime Minister to adopt any part of it that he likes. I might just mention there's also a report out today that confirms our worst fears. We know that domestic violence and violence against women causes huge emotional toll on women, on families, on the community more broadly. What we now know is that it's also costing the economy $21.7 billion every year. Now that's a huge amount of lost productivity, and it's a huge amount of emotional distress. We've got to get at the drivers of domestic violence, and we know that gender inequality is the key driver for the horrific rates of violence against women that we now have in this country. And what we desperately need from this government is, well, for a start, gender equality in the cabinet would be nice, but we also desperately need some funding for those support services for women, which of course Tony Abbott cut in the 2014 budget and then kept those cuts in the 2015 budget. In the next budget, or perhaps even in my EFO that's coming up, we would love to see some more money reinvested into community legal services, into shelters for women, and into long-term accommodation so that women aren't forced to choose between violence or homelessness. Thanks, everyone.
This is APAC, Channel 648.